Hello, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our 10th session of She and Rights Live from Women Deliver Conference 2026, which is being held in Melbourne, Australia. The theme of this session is 56 months left to end female genital mutilation or cutting. Are we on track? She and Rights live sessions at the Women Deliver Conference 2026 are being hosted at D03 Exhibition Space in Melbourne Conference and Exhibition Centre. All sessions are hybrid, live streamed, and host online and on-site speakers and participants, including media. This She and Rights session is co-hosted by Global Center for Health Diplomacy and Inclusion and CNS with partners like Women Deliver Conference 2026, International Planned Parenthood Federation, Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, Asia Pacific Media Alliance for Health, Gender and Development Justice, and Health TV Online Nepal. The session focuses on one of the most heinous forms of gender-based violence and human rights violations, that is female genital mutilation or cutting, which we call FGMC. Despite promises by world leaders at the UN General Assembly 2015 to end FGMC by 2030, rates of it have instead risen. They have instead risen by 15% during the period of 2016 to 2024. A BMJ publication last year tried to argue that circumcision is safe and happens in men too. Yes, male circumcision, when medical and voluntary and with consent, has shown health benefits for males, such as for reducing risk of HIV acquisition. But there is zero evidence for any kind of health or any other benefit of FGMC, except that it allows men to control women's bodies and sexualities. There is nothing like female circumcision because it is mutilation and cutting. The World Health Organization says that even when FGM is medically done, it is against medical ethics, as it has no benefits, and it is a gross form of violence and violation of rights. I would now like to invite my friend and inspiring advocate in Asia who's mobilizing a regional united call to end FGMC. She is no other than Safiya Riyaz of Sri Lanka. Safiya serves as coordinator for Asia Partnership to End FGMC and program officer ARROW, Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women. Safiya, can you please tell us something about the pre-conference on FGMC which you had, and also update us on the Supreme Court case? Over to you.
Thanks, Shobha. I think thanks for setting that context, I think, quite well. I'm here to speak from an Asian perspective, so from a Sri Lankan perspective, and perspective of a regional organization that is mobilizing actors in civil society from across the Asia Pacific to end FGMC. And also when we're looking at target 5.3.2, which is SDG, by 2030, which we had committed to kind of end FGMC, right? And if we're looking at it globally, like you mentioned, the rate needs to be at least 27 times faster. And that's the global picture and not the Asian picture. The Asian picture is that we are way behind. Even in terms of, if we're looking at the numbers, we have 230 million women and girls globally who've been cut. 80 million, that's 35% of the caseload, is in Asia. And that is the second highest case, second to only Africa, right? But if we're looking at it in terms of resources, in terms of political attention, we have been severely under-resourced and severely ignored. So when we're looking at progress in terms of the SDG, Asia, I don't think we're on track at all to meet 2030. Because we've not even started looking at the numbers and started looking at the recording of it. So just for context, for anybody who's listening in Asia, we have 10 countries that we've identified that this is happening and it's been documented. And only 2 countries collect nationally representative data. That's Indonesia and Maldives. So Maldives through the DHS. And only 1 country in the Asia Pacific has any form of legislation even acknowledging this and prohibiting, which is Indonesia, which passed legislation in 2024. which is quite progressed to see in that terms. But if you're looking at an SDG point of view, we're far behind. But I think what you also mentioned was around the pre-conference and about what we've been mobilizing at Women Deliver and about the Indian Supreme Court case. So also to kind of preface, I think, looking at Asia, and something that's sidelined quite a lot when this conversation comes up is that we tend to focus on women, but what we are completely ignoring is that this is happening on young girls. In Asia, young girls and babies, I would say, because in Asia, we know that it's type 1 and type 4 that's commonly practiced, even though there's overlap between the typologies in itself. But it's also very often done between the ages of 0 to 4. So in my community, for example, the most common form happens at 40 days after birth. So what we're, I think, ignoring is that this is happening on young girls, and like you said, without consent and without any medical benefit or without any kind of scientific basis. So if we're looking at it in that case completely, and what we've been learning across in the pre-conference, something that came out quite strongly and something that I think resonated really hard with me is that as how we're kind of framing this and how we're talking about it, even within a global movement, and that kind of has a trickle-down effect, right, in each of our regions. But we are moving past this idea of saying that this is a cultural practice or it's a religious practice or making excuses for it, because standing in the framing right now is that it's a form of gender-based violence, point blank. And there are parts of our culture that we are proud of and that we embrace, right? And we celebrate. So what I wear is a part of my culture, what I eat is a part of my culture, but violence should not be claimed, and I should not be proud of upholding it as a part of my culture. And especially in this case, violence against children, violence against women. So that's the framing that we're taking. That's what we're kind of holding back on. And also with, just want to make sure that hit all my points. And I think the countries, so the Asia Network particularly works across 13 countries, and we have 10 countries where we work with national coordinators and national organizations. And across these countries, the coordinators and partners are doing fantastic work. And India, that is also one area where this problem, the kind of alarm bell kind of raising this, right? It has gone well beyond the SDGs, because sometimes this is thought of as, oh, we don't know this is happening in Asia. Is this new? Or is this Western imported? Is this language Western imported? But I think what we need to make it clear is that within Asia, where there are different names and terminologies we use, circumcision, we have khatna, we have sunnat parampuan, sunnat, khitan. But whatever form we're using, if we're looking at the underlying reasoning behind it, it is always that it's to make women less promiscuous, it's to kind of control of sexuality, right? So that's the underpinning of it, which is also very different to male circumcision, which is why we do not draw comparisons, because it's completely two set of things. And in Asia in itself, for example, in Sri Lanka, the activists have been raising the alarm since the 90s. And there have been newspaper reportings when we're trying to do mappings of this kind of, like, something is happening here and it's not supposed to be happening. It's very concerning, with a lot of implications and so on. And in 2008, we had WHO gave Sri Lanka a 0 score, and which resulted in community women coming forward and saying, I actually know it's happening very much. And similar case in India, where in 2015, Sayo, which is a partner network member who's been doing fantastic work, and women from the community came up, and around, I think it was 300 plus women from the community, and 80% of them had undergone FGMC initially when that kind of report came out. Since then, we do have more evidence and more studies to kind of show that it exists. And there's also this discussion around official data within our region that, and governments kind of tend to pander to this, that we don't have official data to say that this is happening, because of course the anecdotal data that's collated by NGOs is not rigorous enough, right, according to governments. So I think official data is not the same. Not having official data is not the same as not having official information or evidence, because that is well documented in the region. And in India, there was a public interest litigation case that was filed in 2017, but there was 7 years of procedural delay. And since now there is an ongoing seven seat judge at the Supreme Court kind of hearing this case out. But what has happened is that FGMC has now been clubbed with a broader set of rights around like freedom of religion. That's the case that's ongoing. It's not ideal because we're again losing the point. We're not, this is not the conversation we should be having. It should be framed within a violence and LGBT framework. But of course, that hearing and the verdict is going to have implications across the region. So this is something that we're working, kind of watching very closely, because either way it goes, we'll have to mobilize again. It's either going to set us back or it's going to push it forward. So we're really looking forward to how that unravels. But I do want to, I think, preface also by saying that even though we're not on track technically in terms of the SDG progress, we don't want to diminish the work that the women and community organizations have been doing. So it is not to say that we're not moving. The needle has moved. I was speaking to one of the senior activists from Sri Lanka who've been working on this for a really long time, and she was trying to map out what they've done, right, for our documentation as well. And what she said was that I got really emotional while I was mapping this down because I realized it was a lifetime of my work. That the work on this had spanned her lifetime, right? She was like, and we're now passing it on to the younger activists who are coming on. But I think that tells quite a lot that there has been consistent raising the alarm, consistent shutting down, consistent dismissal. But survivors themselves who've been leading some of this have been pushing forward. And we're seeing some of this culminating, like, for example, in the Supreme Court case that's now been pulled up, but also in terms of the actors who are entering and in terms of certain recognition that we're getting in policy spaces, even with governments, even though it's a tough conversation. But we're quite hopeful, and I think we're seeing some mobilization happening.
Yes, thank you, Safiya. And when we are talking, when they blame it on religion and culture, well, in India, years ago, Sati Pratha was very common. The wife was to burn herself on her husband's death. And then we are saying, but that had changed. That has changed. And it should change. That was a heinous crime. And more heinous crime is FGMC.
Yeah.
So anybody saying the club is, it's really pathetic. And I am shocked that it is happening even in today's times. So it has to end. And why is it taking so long? That is, I blame it on patriarchy, that it's always patriarchy which is guiding the actions now even of the governments and all, saying that it is a cultural practice or religious practice. So doing such crimes, if it is religious, I think it should not be followed. What does religion have to do there?
Yeah, I think that's the other important myth kind of that has unfortunately kind of got coupled with this, as it tends to do, because we're moving away also from language saying practice, because we don't want to call it a practice. But it predates any form of religion as well. So if you look into kind of the historicity of it, it predates Islam, it predates Christianity. It was practiced way before. And it, for example, it's not mentioned in the Quran at all, which is why I think we're also very comfortable with going around and saying that we should not be doing this, you know. And the Prophet himself, peace be upon him, he didn't do it for his own daughters. So they're just using a couple of these really weak hadith to kind of put this forward. But yes, I completely agree. Even if people are claiming for it to be a part of culture, culture is fluid, like you said, right? There are parts of culture that we should want to uphold, but there are parts that if you are hurting, that part of culture is hurting our women and girls, we need to be comfortable to say that we do not want to uphold this anymore. Because and I think this is the approach that we go with communities, because we are, when we kind of go into kind of community work, right? Because we are coming from communities that practice it themselves. And we don't particularly believe that our parents and our mothers, you know, do this with the intention to harm particularly. And that's not the type of approach that we want to go into this with. because it's a very sensitive topic. But of course, intention does not kind of account to the what is actually happening, right? So it's sensitive. We're trying to have an open conversation because we really do believe that a part of it is misinformation. That a lot of it is information that people have got wrong, because even now that we get a lot of backlash from this work as well. So even if the kind of backlash that comes with it and the push that we're getting also in terms of resistance, a lot of what they're saying is misinformation. Even, for example, there is an argument that it increases cleanliness. There is nothing like that. And the other argument is that, again, Western imposition, comparing it to other forms of cosmetic procedure, which has no basis at all. So I think if we have an open conversation and we kind of go into the crux of the matter, if it's about control of sexuality, that goes against also religious teachings. So there is it's a whole Pandora's box, but we're hoping that it will change in time. And if not by 2030, I do not want to say the same thing that my senior told somebody who's coming next, right? I don't want to say that it spanned 2 lifetimes. So we're hopeful that it will. And
Safiya, sometimes I feel even bringing religion into it. When we talk of religion, how many of us, as you said, Quran does not say that it has to be there. How many of us actually know the religion? We sort of pretend that we know everything about it. How are you interpreting it is very different for each person.
yeah.
So you can put everything on religion in the manner in which you see it or interpret it.
Yeah, of course. And I think I do not claim to be a religious scholar. And that's something, again, we stick to our framing and the whole religious, because that's a whole other thing. Yeah. But we work very closely with religious scholars and scholars of theology. For example, in Egypt, we have Al-Azhar University, who have issued fatwa claiming point blank that it's not allowed, right? And then we also have network members and partners that we work very closely with, like the Indonesian Women's Ulama Congress, who has put out a fatwa saying it's haram, because when you take a look at it. So again, this is not something that we're just making up. Working very, very closely with experts in different, because this is also very much like a multi-sectoral thing that needs to be addressed, because there are various different layers to this. So we're really trying to come as a collective, even from the whole argument in terms of the problematic pattern of medicalization. So we're working with healthcare institutions and professionals to say that there is no medical benefit, we should not be engaging on that.
It's just controlling the woman's body. That I feel that is the only truth behind it, that men having control over a woman's body since she is born. And it continues throughout her lifetime. Thank you, Safiya. Thank you very much for your time. And
Ma'am, Catherine is
we
here.
now
Yes.
have... Hello?
Yes, Catherine is here. Sorry.
Okay, yes. So we will now listen to an FGMC survivor, Catherine Meng'anyi, who serves as a nurse as well as a powerful advocate for ending FGM, as well as all other forms of violence against women and girls. Catherine, sorry to wake you up so early in the morning, but we would love to hear from you, please.
Much for having me here today. And it's so humbling to pick up this conversation at the best time forward when we are commemorating the International Day of Zero Tolerance against Female Genital Mutilation. My name is Catherine Chacha Meng'anyi. I'm a nurse, epidemiologist. I work in Kenya. I currently coordinate gender-based violence prevention and response in one of the sub-nationals called Migori. And I am also the co-founder and chapter lead of Women in Global Health Kenya, an organization that fights for the rights of gender equity in health, among other things, gender-based violence, but ensuring that women and girls are protected. Other than that, I'm passionate about advocating against gender-based violence. And to pick up this conversation for today, my journey on ending female genital mutilation did not begin in an office. So that's why I usually say, it's all about the community. It's all about us. As a survivor of FGM, so my journey began when I knew where the shoe hurts most. So speaking from a perspective of experience, perspective of pain, today is a very important day where we need to ask ourselves, where do we come in this conversation of ending female genital mutilation, especially in this time and era where it's supposed to end? Some years back, when Catherine was a very young girl, was subjected to medicalized FGM. And that was the first and turning point of life, because the pain is usually very clear at times. The psychosocial trauma is very, very clear to my head. But now I take it like it's an opportunity now to save the more than 1,000 girls that I've known that have passed through my hand and never underwent the cut. So that has been amazing because, one, I appreciate that the communities have their cultural norms, but now where do we move in when it comes to violence against women and girls? So it's not about sitting in the comfort zone. So I have been very categorical in looking at my space. One, being a survivor, two, being a nurse, because I know the effects that will come in my workplace. And then coming from a community where this is a topic that sometimes feels like it's not spoken of. So this has really strengthened my journey to speak up, save girls, and reach out to everyone, because one, FGM can only end if the community themselves pick up the responsibility of protecting girls and women without getting issues to justify why violence should be done. My main message for international zero tolerance for FGM is this should not only be a calendar event. And I always feel bad at times when each year I ask myself, as we commemorate these days, what have we created as impact in the community? Are we celebrating a day that it has to pass? Or are we asking ourselves, what have we done? So it's a reminder of the million of girls and women who have been at risk of FGM or who have undergone FGM, because we still have the survivors to look at. And that tells me that silence, delays, and weak commitment are causing the violence against women and girls in the world. So this is a day to sit down again and reflect. What have we done well? As we all know right now, we are looking at ending FGM by 2030. We need to ask ourselves, is it a reality or it's written in books? Can we come out now and say we need to call it as it is and mention it as it is and get all the players to come into place? So this day, I call out for key things that need to be done. I know all over the world we'll get speeches from the government, we'll get speeches from CSOs, we'll get speeches from non-governmental organizations. Some people will also give opportunity for survivors to talk about it. But now we need to call out, we need to move down out from the day itself and now create action. One of the things is we need to have budget allocation for prevention of FGM, because it is really, we cannot run away from discussing violence against children. And it can only be done if we get support at the correct place and the correct way to be done it. Then we need to clearly put up protection systems that actually reach the girls. I recently worked closely on, I come from a community where FGM is practiced, and I was very keen at how are the girls speaking out. So it was so frustrating when you get girls running away from their homes because they are at risk of undergoing FGM. So where do we call safe? A safe place should be at home, where everybody is friendly and the rest. But now we are turning our homes to be unsafe. So the conversation is, how do we change this narrative? Many countries have laws, have enforced their laws on harming children. But now, do we go back and ask if these laws are being taken care of? As much as there are laws there, but the practice is still there, that clearly shows that, can we revise our laws? Is it because our laws are weak? Or something needs to be done to ensure that justice is gotten for the women and girls undergoing violence? Then we need to invest in community-led solutions. I have always believed in community-owned solutions or community-led solutions, because sociocultural issues are more impacted at the communities. These communities understand why they're practicing this. These communities understand why they're keeping into it. So can we have a strong system that is community-led, a strong system that the community picks up, and they're the first people to pick up this conversation? Because once you have community-led solutions, it's very easy for them to bring up issues and get solutions and understand the vices that they're causing. So good to invest on community-led solutions. As we still speak and end this, one interesting bit is violence against women and girls is not only female genital mutilation. So FGM does not exist in isolation. It is part of a wider system that controls girls, women and girls' bodies. It limits the choices of women and girls, and this brings normalization of violence. So we cannot delink FGM from the bigger picture of violence against women and girls. So we need to emphasize the importance of gender equality, gender equity. It is not optional, it has to work. The conversation of putting women, understanding women, putting them at the decision-making table, listening to their voices, very critical, because as much as they undergo violence, they have a voice to speak in it and they have a voice to change. Then it is a foundational to health, education, and peace. So putting up interventions that end violence against women and girls is a plus to all the country. It's a plus to the world, because it gives an opportunity for health to thrive, because most of the indicators that will even affect women and girls, you can always delink them to the intersectionality of violence coming in. So this conversation has to be taken up, and it will ensure that education and peace is very critical factor. Then protecting the girls, as it's always said, protecting women and girls is like protecting the entire generations. So we cannot run away from these facts, and we really need to look at it in a very positive and in a very focused way. As today, I think through and want to end this and celebrate with all of us, celebrate our wins, put up structures, put up key facts, key way forwards, and key asks on what to do. I will really think about this should be a message of hope. Hope to the survivors of FGM, hope to the women who really struggle to protect their young girls, but they never managed. Hope to the fathers who really tried to protect their young girls, but they never managed. But above all, hope to the girls who did not manage to get protected, but they really wish to be protected. So to me, I would want the world we want for women and girls it will not be given to us, but we need to work through and get it. One, it can be through policies and community-owned-led interventions. So as I end this day, one great quote for me is, every girl, every woman has the right to grow up whole, safe, educated, and free from violence. Ending female genital mutilation is not charity, it is justice. So today, as we pick up this conversation, let us be positive, knowing that we have a role to play and we can do it. It's very great to be in this space, be in this conversation. And I believe that this is not about the day. It's about coming out, speaking out, holding each other's hands, and believing in our vision 2030 in ending female genital mutilation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And before we close, Safiya, I want to ask you something. Many of our listeners, they may not be even aware what FGM is. And
terminology which total external female genitalia. So we have type 1 and type 4 that I will briefly touch on because that's what's happening in the region. Type 1 is and you have sub categories as well. But type 4 is basically it's a very broad category, but it's everything else that doesn't fall into type 1, 2, or 3. So it involves pricking, scraping, burning in some cases, or kind of any other harmful procedure that is done, scraping, and so on. So those are broader, but I guess in my context, how it works is 40 days after birth, that's usually when that happens. It's done by, traditionally, it used to be done by, so I know I think the Tamil word for it, which is called Osta Mami, who's like an auntie who comes to shave your head. Sometimes vague that, and there is no nobody's receiving training on this, right? How much is being cut, what is being cut, it's all completely like nobody knows. Even for example, nobody is usually in the room. Usually, so for example, it's kind of also like a celebratory thing where the older aunties, the older grandmas will be in a room when this is happening. Sometimes the mother itself is not there. So in our community, for example, a woman might not know that this has happened until she has a baby girl, and then this comes up and a lot, because that has happened a lot in my community, right? Even we got to know like much later, and we still don't know whether this has happened, has this not happened. There's a huge degree of ambiguity there. But that tends to be what it is. But I think in Sri Lanka 2024, there was a study done by Women's Action Network, and
We can't hear you, ma'am. Sorry.